Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about my favorite picks from rounds 1 through 16 of our upcoming 2023 fantasy football drafts. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be utilizing the current average draft position from Underdog Fantasy Drafts of the top 16 rounds and picking one singular player from each round, talking about as to why they are my favorite picks as we approach the 2023 fantasy football season. I'll be utilizing a bunch of statistics that I've gathered this offseason along with data in order to justify the reasons as to why I am selecting these players and often why they're my favorite picks within those given rounds. Now, I'm not trying to build the ultimate team from rounds 1 through 16 because I will be mentioning multiple quarterbacks and tight ends, and as you build a fantasy team, you won't have 3 quarterbacks on roster throughout 16 rounds. So I want to go ahead and just give you an understanding. I'm just picking players that in my mind, based on their current average draft position, they provide high ceiling of upside in fantasy football. And quite frankly, I find myself drafting them often for my upcoming 2023 leagues. Before we get into today's content, a reminder for those of you guys who have not yet already and you're trying to stay up to date on my latest content, as I provide a variety of content, whether it is strength of schedule, draft strategies, must avoid, must draft. Tomorrow we'll begin our yearly series in terms of tier list rankings of all positions: running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, etc. So be sure to subscribe to the channel if you have not yet already. Now, for those of you who want additional advantages besides the content that I provide on this channel via videos, live streams, etc., for the entirety of the 2023 fantasy football season, be sure to check out the link down in the description of the video and head on over to Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you use code Andrew to sign up and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get a first-time deposit match up to $100, you're going to get my 2023 fantasy football draft guide and rankings. This draft guide presents my methodology as to how I approach every single position in my upcoming 2023 fantasy football drafts and the statistics that justify my approach for the 2023 season. Additionally, the rankings include by position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense; by tier, half PPR, full PPR, top 200 flex, 4-point per passing touchdown, 6-point per passing touchdown, quarterback rankings, all of that with updated rankings every single week. So go ahead, take advantage of the opportunity on hand, because not only are you going to get help this August prior to your upcoming draft, you're additionally going to get rankings from weeks 1 through 18 every single Sunday morning from me to you for all positions: half PPR, full PPR, with flex rankings. So regardless of what you're doing on Sunday morning this upcoming season, you'll have my rankings and helping yourself potentially capture a 2023 fantasy football championship. For those of you who are wondering if you're eligible, be sure to go ahead, check out the map to the right side of the screen. Based on your current location, will determine your eligibility to go ahead, sign up, start drafting via Underdog right now, gain some experience prior to your upcoming leagues, and of course get the advantages of the draft guide, the rankings, and all of the above for the remainder of the upcoming season. The final thing I wanted to mention before we get into talking about our round 1 favorite picks going into the 2023 season, again, like I've mentioned the last 2 days, the Andrew Kiorkof merchandise line, the 1.01 brand, is going to be available tomorrow, August 24th, 2023. Again, we've shown you guys, and I've been wearing the merchandise the last couple of days as to what I've been up to this offseason. You know, the Dream Team and myself creating incredible products, not only of high quality, but comfortable, stylish clothing for your most stressful of upcoming Sundays for the 2023 season. As you guys can see on screen, the limited edition tie-dye hoodies that are going to be available. Again, they won't be there for long, so you'll have to go ahead and get them quickly. Incredible overall products, champion brand with those tie-dye hoodies. Additionally, besides the hoodies that you guys can see on screen, I wore the sand color yesterday. I'm currently wearing the navy. There's a variety of colors in regards to greetings and salutations, Andrew Kiorkof in fantasy football, the 1.01 brand. Of course, we have beanies, we have bucket hats, we have ball caps, all of that available tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. The website will be up and ready to go. I'll once again mention it tomorrow, so you guys can get some incredible clothing, but on top of it, rep me and the channel. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get into talking about my favorite picks for the 2023 fantasy football season for each round. Round 1, many of you may be thinking, well, Andrew, wouldn't your favorite pick technically be Justin Jefferson because he's the first player off the board? Even though you may think that's the case, ultimately, I looked at every single round in terms of current ADPs on Underdog Fantasy, and I just wanted to talk about players that perhaps I haven't talked about enough this offseason that I truly believe provide consistency, because that's what you want with your first round selection. Specifically, when we talk about someone like Travis KELCE, currently has an ADP of 6.4, the 6th overall pick within the first round. You may be wondering to yourself, Andrew, is that a justified overall selection in a half PPR scoring format? A player who has been the #1 overall ranked tight end in 6 out of the last 7 seasons. A player who hasn't missed a game due to injury since 2013. A player who's been averaging 15.3 0.38 fantasy points per game on average in the 48 regular season games he's played with Patrick Mahomes since 2020. Overall, when you look at the drop-off in production at the tight end position, like I've referenced to in the past in terms of draft strategy videos, when we look at the average of the number one overall tight end in a half PPR scoring format over the course of the last 3 seasons, they've averaged about 156.39 fantasy points in a half PPR. Now, when we look at the RB4 and the wide receiver 4, over the course of the last 3 seasons, on average, they put up 262.6 fantasy points and 258.5. Overall, the justification of selecting Travis KELCE after the top 3 running backs, potentially, or the top 3 wide receivers are off the board, and the 1.06 selection in your upcoming draft is absolutely justifiable based on not only his current production, but the drop-off in production that we have witnessed at the tight end position. There is such a significant drop-off from what Travis KELCE has been able to accomplish in the last 3 seasons. Again, putting up 260 or more fantasy points in 2 out of the last 3 seasons. When you look at the drop-off between him and the number 2 tight end over the course of the last couple of years, it is quite significant. Therefore, when you have an opportunity at 1.06 or beyond to select Travis KELCE, in my opinion, absolutely that should be an opportunity you should be taking advantage of as we approach the 2023 year. Again, you're looking for first round consistency, and that's exactly what Travis KELCE provides. Many people may point towards his age and say, you know, he's getting older. I understand that, but age is just a number when we're talking about a future Hall of Fame tight end, and perhaps the guy that's going to go down as the greatest tight end in NFL history. All right, moving on. The number 2, the second round player that I honestly find myself drafting a lot, and I believe is one of my favorite selections, is Derrick Henry. Based on the current market at the running back position, considering there are so many uncertainties that revolve around guys like Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor, that in my opinion has continued to build more confidence in ensuring that I get one of these second round running backs. There are other guys like a Tony Pollard, a Saquon Barkley, but Derrick Henry, currently sitting at an ADP of 20.4, is one of the most enticing selections based on his level of consistency. Again, we've talked about how great and consistent Travis KELCE's been over the course of his career. That's pretty much been the case for Derrick Henry, and consistency is king in fantasy football, especially within our top couple rounds, as we need these players to be able to sustain the entirety of this season. So by the time we get to our Week 17 championship games, they're there to carry our teams. We're talking about a player who's been the number 3, 2, and 4 overall ranked tight end 2019, 2020, and 2022. In 2021, prior to his season-ending injury, he was the number 1 overall running back in terms of fantasy points per game on average. An incredible overall producer, and of course, similar to Travis KELCE, a future Hall of Famer. We're talking about a running back that since 2019, since Ryan Tannehill has taken the starting job of this offense, has been averaging 20.38 fantasy points per game and 24.98 touches per game. He scored 60 touchdowns, either passing, rushing, or receiving in the last 55 games that he has played. Derrick Henry is not a normal running back. And even though he's getting up there in age, he has demonstrated that he is not slowing down and has actually gotten better over the last couple of years. When you compare his 2021 efficiency in comparison to his 2022 year, even though his 2022 offensive line was significantly worse, he was a better overall producer, and additionally is getting more and more utilization within the receiving game, setting career highs last season in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. If those numbers continue to stack and we get Derrick Henry fully healthy for this upcoming season, as we expect, by the time you get to weeks 15 through 17, he should be able to capture you a fantasy football championship as the Tennessee Titans take on the Houston Texans, Seattle Seahawks, and Houston Texans in the final 3 weeks of the fantasy season. Let's not forget, Derrick Henry in the last 6 games against the Houston Texans has averaged 29.17 fantasy points per game, 10 touchdowns, and 1,100 rushing yards against that team in the last 6 games. He's a fantastic second round selection. Moving on to round 3. I want to present Josh Allen. Now, currently via ADP of Underdog Fantasy, we see Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts both coming off the board in the second round. Josh Allen is a third-round selection, and in my opinion, he is the best overall fantasy quarterback in a 4-point per passing touchdown format going into the 2023 year, because consistency has been the name of the game for Josh Allen. He's been able to put up 395 or more fantasy points in each of the last 3 seasons, and if it wasn't for the canceled game last season, would have been the number 1 overall fantasy quarterback for 3 consecutive years. That level of production is unstoppable. And as we approach the 2023 year, I understand that there is a potential in which Damian Harris, Latavius Murray being included within this offense is going to lead to potentially more rushing attempts for them down in the red zone. Many of you do worry about Josh Allen. They want to go ahead and keep him healthy and keep him, injury free for majority of the remainder of his career. But he is a younger running back, and his ability to run the ball certainly changes games. For those of you who are insistent on the idea that he's going to run the ball less this upcoming season, you got to remember 62% of his rushing yards that he gained last year were off of scrambles, 38% on designed runs. If you go ahead and you move that 38% to 20%, you're still going to see significant production from a mobile quarterback who in the last 3 seasons has scored 6, 6, and 7 rushing touchdowns in those individual years from within the red zone. Not to mention, he's been one of the most dynamic passing quarterbacks in the league, getting a minimum of 4,200 passing yards and 35 passing touchdowns each of the last 3 years, while averaging 24.35 fantasy points per game throughout that span of time, scoring 2 or more touchdowns in 42 of those 49 games. Quite literally 86% of the time, he's scoring 2 or more touchdowns, the highest rate amongst all quarterbacks throughout that span of time. Josh Allen, an automatic selection for me in the 3rd round. Moving on, let's talk about Joe Money Mixon. Joe Mixon is being heavily slept on. His current ADP of 41.6 is a tragedy, but I'll take it. I love to see Joe Mixon drop at this point because in my mind, with so much uncertainty with Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor, the value of these running backs that are between a Derrick Henry, and then we're talking about Joe Mixon's, Najee Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, Aaron Jones, Kenneth Walker. When we look at the separation of value, there is significantly a drop, but Joe Mixon, in my mind, as we approach the 2023 season, has the ability and the opportunity to close the gap and be one of these running backs that can be in the elite level conversation this upcoming season. I mean, when I compare him to the other running backs that are currently available in the 4th round, where he's currently being selected based on his current average draft position, we're talking about him being drafted next to guys like Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, and Breece Hall. That in itself is absolutely ridiculous. Najee Harris has Jalen Warren breathing down his neck. Etienne has Tank Bigsby breathing down his neck. And of course, I mean, Breece Hall is coming off an ACL injury and has Dalvin Cook ready to go to get all the touches that he's not going to be able to accumulate because he's slow to return. That in itself is so ridiculous that now without Samaje Perine within this backfield, Joe Mixon is being treated like he's a lesser running back, like he's not as capable of these other guys, and he's not going to be given the elite level opportunity that he has witnessed over the last 2 seasons. From 2021 to 2022, Joe Mixon is averaging 20.13 touches per game throughout the regular season, nearly 16 fantasy points per game in the last 30 games. Last season had a career high in terms of targets per game and receptions per game, and was on pace, if he had stayed healthy in a 17-game season, to have 91 targets and 73 receptions. The overall production that we saw from Joe Mixon back in 2021 can very easily be repeated. It's just a matter of whether this offense is going to continue to be elite, which by all accounts is probably going to be the case. And if they get down into the red zone with an improved offensive line, they're going to have opportunities for Joe Mixon to punch it in. And not only that, when you're getting unimpeded volume of opportunities similar to 2021, where Joe Mixon handled 71.28% of the RB opportunities within this offense, you're going to score a lot of fantasy points. I mean, 70 plus receptions is truly on the table for a running back like Joe Mixon, who's going to get all the red zone attempts, who's going to be the 3rd down back, and is going to dominate this upcoming season. Moving on, let's talk about Diontae Johnson. Diontae Johnson as a 5th round selection is one that I'm absolutely happy to make, primarily because as you get to the 5th round and you compare it to the other wide receivers that are available henceforth, there is a very low likelihood that you're going to find another wide receiver within the remainder of the position that is going to accumulate as many opportunities as Diontae Johnson is. Last season, 147 targets, 6th most amongst all wide receivers, tied with Garrett Wilson. Now, when you take that into account and the fact that he scored quite literally 0 touchdowns in 2022, I looked back all the way to 2009 at all wide receivers who had 130 or more targets in the National Football League. Not a single one of them scored 0 touchdowns. And in fact, throughout the 147 wide receiver performances that accumulated 130 or more targets, not including Diontae Johnson in 2022, the remainder of them that were able to accomplish that feat, they were averaging 7.8 receiving touchdowns per season. This heavily reminds me of Miles Sanders last year, considering the fact that in 2021, he had 0 touchdowns to his name, but then going into 2022, double-digit touchdowns because the opportunity continued to stay consistent. I think that's going to be the case, especially with this offense taking a step forward, with Kenny Pickett improving his pace of play, and him purely just being more comfortable with the speed of the game, and with Matt Canada, the offensive coordinator. Last season, in the 10 healthy games that Kenny Pickett played, he targeted Diontae Johnson 8.5 times per game. Throughout a 17-game season, we're talking about 145 targets. You're not going to find that anywhere outside of the top 5 rounds unless you have a breakout player that is completely disguised to all of us. in my opinion, a wide receiver who's been able to accomplish 144 plus targets each of the last 3 seasons. We've seen him demonstrate elite levels of production. He'll once again do that this upcoming season. Moving on, let's talk about Tyler Lockett, the 6th round selection that I truly don't mind making, and honestly is one of my favorite picks. Like I mentioned yesterday in regards to avoiding DK Metcalf in my upcoming draft. DK Metcalf currently has an ADP in the middle of the 3rd round. He very rarely drops to the 4th round, and because of this and the fact that I want a piece of this offense, I absolutely am willing to go ahead and draft Tyler Lockett in the 6th round. A wide receiver that has finished as wide receiver 15, 14, 9, 13, and 13 in the last 5 years is being drafted in the 6th round. I understand they went ahead and they made a 1st round selection, 20th overall, Jackson Smith-Njigba out of Ohio State, an incredible talent. But Jackson Smith-Njigba sustained an injury the other day, and he's probably going to need wrist surgery. And like we've heard from Pete Carroll, he's going to miss 3 to 4 weeks at this current moment in time, unless there is something to occur that may, force him to miss more time. He's got a fracture in his wrist, which is going to allow Tyler Lockett to maintain his top 2 wide receiver standing within this offense and continue that pace for the remainder of the season. I don't expect Jackson Smith-Njigba to absolutely, dismantle the overall opportunity and potential of Tyler Lockett within a season. His effectiveness, his efficiency, the fact that he never misses games. He has played 127 games of the total 130 that he's been eligible to play in his career. 127 out of 130. On top of it, has scored 45 receiving touchdowns in the last 80 regular season games he has participated in. Last season averaged 12.21 fantasy points per game. Again, when we're talking about an offense that can very easily support 3 top 36 wide receivers, we've seen it done in the past, but at least 2 top 24 wide receivers. Geno Smith is not going to, absolutely fall apart this year. He was incredible last year and he's going to continue that consistency in 2023. Let's move on to round 7 through 12, beginning with our 7th round favorite pick. It is David Montgomery. You guys have heard me talk about him all off season. When you compare his current ADP to someone like Jahmyr Gibbs is coming off the board in the middle of the 3rd round on Underdog Fantasy. Jahmyr Gibbs, in order to return that overall investment, is going to have to be the Alvin Kamara of this upcoming season. He's going to have to be at least 80% of what Alvin Kamara was his rookie season. And there is a very good chance that we can witness that. Again, Dan Campbell comes from, the Sean Payton coaching tree. He knows how to utilize multiple running backs. He's already mentioned this offseason he wants a 2-headed monster. But in specific, Dan Campbell has been quoted to say, I think you need a back that when push comes to shove, he can carry the load. Somebody I feel that we can give the ball 20 to 25 times in a game potentially. And then he goes on to say that we need someone that is a specialist player that can absolutely work in on receiving work and continue to, cut up the defense. And he mentions Jahmyr Gibbs by name. That's fine. But we know that going into this upcoming season, they signed David Montgomery as a free agent to be the Jamal Williams of this team. Jamal Williams, whose workload consisted of 262 rushing attempts, 1,066 rushing yards, and 17 rushing touchdowns last year, only playing 40.28% of the offensive snaps, finishing as the RB8 overall. Behind one of the best offensive lines in terms of continuity going into this season, has 4 of their 5 starters returning. And not only that, within an offense that has one of the easiest strength of schedules at the running back position. There is an extreme level of disrespect going in the direction of David Montgomery this offseason based on his current ADP. And I'm loving every second of it as I'll continue to invest, because what we saw Jamal Williams get last season in terms of workload opportunity, 11 games of 15 or more rushing attempts. Anytime David Montgomery was given that level of opportunity from 2019 through 2022 with the Chicago Bears, averaging 14.93 fantasy points per game. He's been a durable running back, and despite his couple of injuries over the course of the last couple of years, he's one of only 5 running backs that has had 2,000 or more offensive snaps played in the last 3 seasons at the running back position. That is rare. I think David Montgomery, a fantastic selection in round 7. Moving on to a running back that currently at an ADP of 85.2 is another one of these sleepers, a guy that currently should be consider the 3-down back of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going into this upcoming season. An offense that could be far better than we anticipate going into this year. Yes, they're going to have a significant drop-off from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield, but perhaps we are undervaluing the entire, efforts of this team as a whole. We're still going to witness a lot of utilization from the running back position with no Leonard Fournette there, and the only other backfield competition being Keyshawn Vaughn and Chase Edmonds. Chase Edmonds, you got to remember, has played for 3 teams in the last 2 seasons. He has been a guy that Primarily is utilized as a third down kind of receiving back, but we won't need that as Rachaad White completely covers it. Last season, 58 targets, 50 receptions, one of the better receiving backs in the National Football League. So Chase Edmonds likely is going to play a lot of special teams. So going into this upcoming year, a running back who at the back end of 2022 from weeks 10 through 17 was averaging 16.71 touches per game within this offense, he's going to get more and more of a workload, and at bare minimum should be a top 24 back that if you're able to get in round 8 is a steal. I've mentioned this stat in the past. I'll continue to do it as we approach the 2023 season. Since 2019, there have been 47 running backs that accumulated 150 rushing attempts and 40 receptions in a season. 45 of those 47 running backs put up a minimum of 159.8 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. 159.8 fantasy points last season makes you RB24. In 2021 makes you RB24. In 2020 makes you RB21. In 2019 makes you RB23. That is what we're anticipating for Rachaad White at a base minimum in the 2023 season. Moving on to our round 9 player, it is Dak Prescott. The fact that you can get a quarterback who, in my opinion, is a top 10 quarterback going into this upcoming year this late in the draft is ridiculous. Currently sitting at an ADP of 106, Dak Prescott, whenever he's been healthy for a full season, he's always been a top 12 quarterback in fantasy football. Since 2019, averaging 20.74 fantasy points per game in the last full healthy 47 regular season games that he's played, scoring 2 or more touchdowns in 33 of those 47 games, 70% rate of 2 or more touchdowns. Incredible. On top of it, this offense within the Dallas Cowboys organization, yes, they are losing Kellen Moore as an offensive coordinator who has helped lead them to many offensive feats that they have gathered over the last couple seasons. Again, since 2019, number 5 in passing attempts, number 5 in passing completions, number 5 in passing yards, and number 7 in passing touchdowns amongst all teams in the National Football League. Specifically, last year, the Dallas Cowboys scored 52 total offensive touchdowns, which was third only to the Kansas City Chiefs and Philadelphia Eagles that were ahead of them. Now, in the last 2 healthy seasons, we have seen Dak Prescott play. 2021, 4,449 passing yards, 40 passing touchdowns. 2019, 4,900 passing yards, 33 passing touchdowns. Now, if in fact you go to last season from week 7 through 18 after he came back from the injury, if you take his averages over the course of that span of time, from week 7 through 18 and expanded upon a 17-game season, 4,200 yards, 36 passing touchdowns that you can get in the 9th round, along with 250 plus rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. A 300-point fantasy quarterback in the 9th round, absolute steal in my mind. Moving on to the 10th round, let's talk about David NJOKU, tight end of the Cleveland Browns. Currently sitting at an ADP of about 109. David NJOKU, in my mind, very easily can be another one of these solid tight ends you grab kind of late in your draft if in fact you are prioritizing a running back, wide receiver, or quarterback depth early, and you can find consistent production from him throughout the entirety of the season. Again, this was a guy that I planted the flag on last year, and I'll continue to tout his name because David NJOKU is an extremely talented tight end. He's within an offense that since 2020, since Kevin Stefanski has joined this team as the head coach and primary play caller, they have targeted their tight ends the 4th most times since 2020. Again, that's in the conversation with teams like the Philadelphia Eagles, Baltimore Ravens, and Kansas City Chiefs. We know the kind of tight ends that they have had over the last couple of years and the amount of opportunity they have been given. So the Browns within this conversation, incredible. Last season with Jacoby Brissett at the quarterback position, we saw David NJOKU averaging 8.5 fantasy points per game, was the number 7 overall tight end in terms of fantasy points per game. When Deshaun Watson appeared on the scene, he was awful. Even with that being the case, David NJOKU still averaged about 7.34 fantasy points per game. But this is all while Deshaun Watson was kind of getting the dust off of him and trying to get back into NFL, form. Playing with a 58% passing completion percentage, Deshaun Watson wasn't really helping many of the receiving options surrounding him. But now that he has an entire offseason working with all of his teammates and ready to approach this upcoming season, we should see a lot of utilization of the tight end position, similar to the way that Deshaun Watson did back in Houston. 2020 Houston tight ends, 75 catches, 913 receiving yards, 7 receiving touchdowns that year. 2019 Houston Texans tight ends, 71 catches, 767 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns. That's a lot of production from tight ends with Deshaun Watson over the years. Moving on, let's talk about our 11th round player. It is Allen Lazard. Currently, with the news spreading out this morning that Corey Davis has officially retired and he is done with the New York Jets, Allen Lazard continues to get more and more opportunity within this offense. We all know that Garrett Wilson's going to be the number 1. That is a given, without a doubt in my mind. But now that you have Allen Lazard pulling number 2 wide receiver coverage going into this upcoming season with Aaron Rodgers, they already have the continuity, the bond, the experience together in their days at Green Bay. I mean, you go back to last season, Allen Lazard proved that he could be the number 1 wide receiver of an offense. And even though he wasn't able to sustain that for the entirety of the year, he doesn't have to sustain it this upcoming season. Garrett Wilson's going to pull majority of the number one coverage, majority of the targets. But when Allen Lazard is called upon, he will deliver. Last season from weeks 2 through 18, again, the only healthy games in which Allen Lazard played because he missed week 1 due to an injury, he averaged 9.65 fantasy points per game. But from weeks 2 through 9, before Christian Watson exploded onto the scene and absolutely took over within this offense, we saw Allen Lazard from weeks 2 through 9 averaging 12.53 half PPR fantasy points per game, scoring 5 touchdowns in the first 7 games of his season. I truly do believe at an ADP of 123.3, Allen Lazard is heavily being slept on, just like he was last season and will continue to be. So we'll take advantage of the opportunity on hand. Moving on to round 12, we have Tyler HIGBEE. I've talked about him a lot this offseason. Again, I mean, Cooper Kupp's already back to practicing. I don't know how many doubters there still are of Cooper Kupp and his health, but if you doubt his potential, again, look to Tyler HIGBEE as someone that you might want to roster at the tight end position. An offense that plays in 11 personnel sets 90% of the time, or at least has 2 tight ends on the field 9% of the time. So 99% of the time they have 1 tight end on the field, and it's Tyler HIGBEE. They're going to continue to get him utilized. Last season had 108 targets, 72 receptions, and the number 2 receiving option of this offense is Van Jefferson. There is not enough target competition to prevent Tyler HIGBEE from continuing to find success within this offense. Therefore, in the 12th round, he's a player that I'm absolutely targeting because I don't have to look for a guy like TJ Hawkinson or Dylan Waller in the 5th round if I want to prioritize a running back, quarterback, and or wide receiver, and then eventually later in my draft, pair up Tyler HIGBEE with another tight end and have myself a good rotation of players that are not only going to be utilized down in the red zone heavily, seeing himself a 24% target share within the red zone last season, but also get himself a lot of work between the 20s. All right, let's move on to the back 4 of this conversation. Our round 13 player, it is Jonathan Mingo. Earlier today, we had word that in fact, DJ Chark, dealing with a little bit of an injury, may hold him out for some certain amount of time. Either way, I'm beginning to see that Jonathan Mingo, besides his snap counts within the preseason, but of course the chemistry that he is building with Bryce Young, his fellow rookie this upcoming season, is going to continue to be the biggest difference maker as to whether or not we're going to see this guy take the next step forward and be another one of these early drafted wide receivers that can make an immediate impact. Since 2018, there have been 27 wide receivers selected within the top 40 selections of their NFL draft. Jonathan Mingo is one of the next of that overall conversation. 14 of those 27 players played 15 or more games within a season. Of those 14 players, 11 of them ranked within the top 36. There is a high likelihood that within an offense that does not have an established number 1 receiving option, with a rookie quarterback that has a brand new head coach and a complete shift within this organization and the culture, they're looking for a number 1. Adam Thielen is certainly getting up there in age. Hayden Hurst can get himself sprinkles of opportunity. Miles Sanders is going to get himself a couple catches here and there. But Jonathan Mingo has a pure opportunity with a little bit of a setback from DJ Chark to be the number 1 within this offense. And as a sleeper player, definitely be an option that in round 13 could pan out for the remainder of the season. Moving on to ZAMIR White, our round 14 player. ZAMIR White at this current moment in time seems like a pretty decent overall investment considering the uncertainty that revolves around Josh Jacobs. There's really just no news that is leaking from that overall, situation. There's nothing that kind of leads us to think positively about it. There's nothing that leads us to think negatively about it. We're kind of in the middle, unknown. But at this current moment in time, ZAMIR White, if in fact Josh Jacobs does not show up, would be the number 1 running back. A former Georgia running back in 2021. He has the running back pedigree of all those incredible Georgia running backs who have come out of that university over the course of the last 10 years. So even though Amir Abdullah, Brandon Bolden are within this organization and can get themselves some touches here and there, and I know that they recently signed guys for the preseason like Darwin Thompson or Damian Williams, former Kansas City Chiefs running backs, those guys are probably going to get cut. ZAMIR White would be the number 1 guy if, in fact, Josh Jacobs doesn't show. And if you can get a starting running back in the league in the 14th round, might as well take the risk. Moving on, let's talk about Jake Ferguson, the second-year tight end for the Dallas Cowboys. Even though the Dallas Cowboys sent a second-day pick this season, a second-round selection for Luke Schumacher within the NFL draft, Schumacher seems to be a second-string player going into this upcoming season. And Jake Ferguson could very easily mount himself as not only the starting tight end of this team, but a heavily utilized player within this offense. You look at what Dalton Schultz was able to accomplish in the last 3 seasons within this offense, ranking as tight end 15, 3, and 10. Being able to accumulate 89 targets minimum in each of the last 3 years, there is going to be opportunities for Dak Prescott to look in the direction of Jake Ferguson and honestly could be the next Dalton Schultz within this offense. There's a reason why they let Schultz walk, is because they knew what kind of talent that they had on this team. And this offseason, we've even heard Dak Prescott say, and been quoted to have said, Jake Ferguson will become a big-time player in this league, and I'm hoping that's going to be this upcoming year within this offense. Moving on, the round 16 player is Gus the Bus Edwards. Gus Edwards provides just a handcuff situation here that in my mind isn't the greatest overall scenario, but if in fact we are worried about the potential of J.K. Dobbins, the injury history that he has had, the ACL struggles, and had to go back and clean up his knee last season, if anything is to ever bother J.K. Dobbins this year, and he's going to miss any sort of extent of time, whether it's in the beginning of the season, middle, or end, Gus Edwards is an absolute monster. And even though Gus Edwards last season had to recover and come back from his own ACL injury, he still produced very well within this offense that is built to run the ball. I know that they want to continue to lean towards passing it more with Todd Monken as their new offensive coordinator, but what they do well is run the ball, and you got to continue to do what you do well and what defines your team. Last season, in the 5 games in which Gus Edwards had 10 or more rushing attempts, he was averaging 10.16 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. He's not going to get receptions. He's not going to make the sexy plays. He is going to be a guy that is going to ram it forward, get 5 yards on every carry, and continue to be a relevant back within an offense that, of course, with a mobile quarterback with so many threats, can honestly have value at ADP of 184. All right, that's going to cover it for me, guys. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Don't forget, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the season. Tomorrow will be the beginning of our tier list series every single year. Tomorrow we'll talk about the running back position, top 50 at the position specifically, in terms of a tier list, giving you guys my representation prior to your upcoming drafts this upcoming weekend or in the coming weeks. Additionally, again, if you haven't yet already, check out Underdog Fantasy. If you sign up today using code Andrew, make a first-time deposit minimum of $10. Not only are you going to get the draft guide, the first-time deposit match, the draft rankings that are weekly updated, my email to you. Again, check your spam folder if you have not yet already. Additionally, you'll get rankings every single Sunday morning, weeks 1 through 18, because I don't just want to help you this offseason. I want to help you every single week with rankings, videos, and all of that so you can make the most informed decisions on draft day, when you're starting and sitting players, and when you're capturing a 2023 Fantasy Football Championship. Lastly, tomorrow is a very exciting day. The launch of the 1.01 brand on this channel, the Andrew Kiorkof YouTube channel. Official merchandise will be available, so keep an eye out for that. The link will be in the description for tomorrow's video. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.